The slap landed so hard that the conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. Rachel pressed a hand against the front of her cream-colored dress, now stained bright red with fruit punch, and glared at me as if I'd committed the worst offense imaginable. "Look what you did," she shouted. Rachel, I'm so sorry. Someone bumped into." Before I could finish, her palm cracked across my cheek. The entire backyard froze. Children stopped chasing each other around the picnic tables. My cousins lowered their paper plates. Even my uncles, who had been arguing over football a second earlier, fell silent. Rachel pointed at the puddles spreading across the patio. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," she snapped. "Clean this mess up, and then get out." I stared at her, one hand against my burning face. It had been an accident. Everyone had seen it happen. Everyone. Daniel stepped beside his wife, without even asking what happened. "You heard Rachel," my older brother said, his voice cold. "Either apologize properly, or leave." I looked from his face to the dozens of relatives surrounding us. Not one person spoke. Not one person said it wasn't my fault. So I slowly set the stack of napkins back onto the table. "No," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward my car. Behind me, I heard Rachel scoff in triumph. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that before the afternoon was over, something waiting at her own front door would change everything. The annual Akoro family reunion was supposed to celebrate what would have been my grandmother's 79th birthday. Every July, the entire family gathered at my uncle's large house outside town. There were folding tables covered with homemade food, cousins laughing beneath the old mango trees, and the same stories everyone pretended they hadn't heard 100 times before. Normally, I was the one making sure everything ran smoothly. If someone forgot ice, I went to buy it. If decorations needed hanging, I climbed the ladder. If two relatives started arguing, someone would inevitably say, "Miriam will sort it out." Keeping the peace had quietly become my job years ago. Not because anyone asked. Because whenever there was tension, it was easier for everyone if I gave in. Rachel knew that. Ever since marrying Daniel 4 years earlier, she'd become the unofficial authority at every family gathering. She decided who helped in the kitchen, where everyone sat, even whose opinions mattered. Most people simply agreed with her to avoid conflict. Daniel never challenged her. And after enough years, neither did anyone else. Earlier that afternoon, before guests had fully arrived, I'd gone into Daniel's house looking for packing tape Rachel had asked me to find for the decorations. Instead, I'd wandered into Daniel's home office. On his desk lay several estate documents. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. Then I noticed signatures that looked wrong. My grandmother's name appeared more than once. So did 2 relatives who had died years earlier. Before I could study them any longer, Rachel appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing in here?" she'd asked sharply. "I'm just looking for tape." Her expression tightened for only a second before she smiled. "It's not in here." I apologized and left, telling myself I was probably mistaken. I wasn't about to accuse anyone over a few papers I'd only glanced at. Driving away from the reunion now, my cheek still stinging from the slap, those documents kept replaying in my mind. Something about them hadn't felt right. Back at the reunion, Rachel laughed with guests as though nothing had happened. But every so often, her eyes drifted toward Daniel's house across town. There was something restless behind her smile. Hours later, after the last relatives had gone home, Daniel and Rachel pulled into their driveway. Rachel complained about her ruined dress, while Daniel unlocked the front door. The moment it swung open, both of them stopped moving. Daniel stared through the open doorway. 2 uniformed investigators stood in the foyer. Another was placing evidence markers on the dining room table, while 2 attorneys in dark suits sorted neatly stacked files. One of the investigators looked up. "Mr. and Mrs. Akoro." Daniel blinked. Yes, what's going on? The investigator held up an official document. We're executing a lawful search warrant. Please step inside, but do not touch anything until we've finished documenting the property. Rachel's face lost its color for a split second before she forced a laugh. There has to be some mistake. No mistake, ma'am. The attorney beside the investigator spoke calmly. You'll both receive copies of the warrant. Daniel looked from the officers to Rachel. Rachel, what is this about? She slipped her hand into his. I honestly don't know. Miles away, I let myself into my apartment and leaned against the closed door. The silence felt strange after everything that had happened. I set my keys on the counter and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The faint outline of Rachel's hand was still visible on my cheek. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat without drinking it. Instead, my thoughts drifted back to Daniel's office. Those documents, those signatures. I could still picture them. My grandmother's name appeared on multiple authorization forms. Then there had been another signature. Uncle Samuel. Except Uncle Samuel had died nearly 3 years earlier. At the time, I'd convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were copies. Maybe I'd misunderstood what I was looking at. Without proof, accusing someone would have been reckless. So I'd said nothing. Earlier that afternoon replayed in my mind. Rachel had been outside, directing everyone where to place tables. I'll grab the tape, I'd offered. It's probably in Daniel's office, she'd answered without looking up. The office door had already been open. The tape wasn't there. Instead, several folders sat spread across the desk. One folder had slipped partially open. Curious only because I was looking for supplies, I'd glanced down. Beneficiary forms. Transfer authorizations. Estate account summaries. Before I could make sense of any of it. What are you doing? Rachel's voice had cut through the room. She'd stepped inside much faster than seemed necessary. I'm just looking for tape, I'd explained. She crossed the room immediately and closed the folder. I already found some. Her smile hadn't reached her eyes. You can go back outside. At the time, I dismissed the awkward moment. Now, I wasn't so sure. Back inside Daniel's house, investigators photographed every room connected to the home office. Boxes were labeled. Documents were cataloged. Rachel remained unusually quiet. Then, while Daniel answered routine questions from an investigator, she quietly unlocked her phone beneath the dining table. Her thumb moved rapidly across the screen. Delete. 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 Entire conversations disappeared. She glanced around. No one appeared to notice. Or so she thought. An investigator standing near the hallway made a brief note in his notebook before saying nothing. Daniel returned. They're searching the office too, he whispered. Rachel forced another reassuring smile. It's probably about the estate paperwork. Lawyers create confusion all the time. Daniel frowned. Then, why are investigators here instead of just lawyers? Rachel looked away instead of answering. For the first time since they'd married, Daniel saw something he had never expected to see on his wife's face. Fear. Just then, one of the investigators approached carrying a folder. He opened it carefully, looked directly at Rachel, and spoke in the same calm, professional tone. Mrs. Okoro. He placed several bank records on the dining table. We'd like you to explain these transfers. Daniel stared at the bank records, then at Rachel. What transfers? He asked. Rachel didn't even look at the papers. I have no idea what they're talking about. The investigator remained composed. You'll have an opportunity to answer our questions. For now, we'd appreciate your cooperation. Rachel folded her arms. I'm not discussing anything until I speak with my attorney. That is your right, the investigator replied. Daniel's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Within minutes, the Okoro family group chat had exploded. What happened at Daniel's house? Why are there police cars outside? Someone said investigators are there. Is everyone okay? Photos taken from across the street began circulating through the chat. Someone had captured images of official vehicles parked in the driveway. The news spread faster than anyone could control it. By the next morning, several relatives had gathered outside Daniel's home, whispering among themselves. The same people who had watched Rachel slap me without saying a word now stood behind the police tape, trying to piece together what was happening. Aunt Grace lowered her voice. This can't be about the reunion, can it? I don't know, Uncle Peter answered, but I've never seen this many investigators for a misunderstanding. Rachel stepped outside onto the porch before anyone could ask more questions. She pointed toward the crowd. This is Miriam's doing. Several heads turned immediately. Rachel continued, her voice rising. She embarrassed herself yesterday, and now she's trying to destroy this family. Daniel nodded almost automatically. She left angry, he said. Maybe she reported something. Someone in the crowd frowned. But, reported what? Rachel had no answer. My phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. What? His voice was sharp. What have you done? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Investigators searched our house. Rachel says you reported us because of yesterday. I took a slow breath. I reported no one. You expect me to believe that? I don't need you to believe me. Silence. Then I continued. I left because you told me to. After that, I went home. That's it. You were in my office yesterday. Looking for tape. You saw documents. I saw papers on your desk. I didn't even know what they were. Daniel hesitated. Rachel thinks. I know what Rachel thinks. My voice stayed calm. But thinking isn't evidence. Before he could respond, I ended the call. Outside Daniel's house, one of the estate attorneys stepped forward to address the growing crowd. I understand there's a great deal of speculation, she said. However, I'd like to clarify one point. Everyone fell silent. This investigation did not begin yesterday. Several relatives exchanged confused looks. The attorney continued. For several weeks, multiple financial institutions reported irregular activity involving estate accounts. Those reports triggered an independent investigation. A murmur swept through the crowd. So this has nothing to do with the reunion? Someone asked. No. Or Miriam. No. Rachel's expression tightened. She stepped forward quickly. She's lying about seeing paperwork yesterday anyway. Miriam is making stories up to save herself. The attorney looked at her without reacting. We're not relying on anyone's stories. At that moment, another investigator walked out carrying a large evidence folder. He laid it carefully across the hood of a government vehicle and opened it. Inside were dozens of beneficiary forms. One investigator pointed to several signatures. We've already recovered multiple documents bearing signatures that appear to have been executed after the individuals had passed away. The crowd went completely silent. Daniel leaned closer. His eyes widened. The names on the pages belonged to relatives who were no longer alive. Daniel stared at the open folder as though he no longer recognized the names written across the pages. That's impossible, he whispered. One of the investigators closed the folder and addressed him calmly. We understand this is difficult, Mr. Okoro. That's why we're verifying every document through independent examination. A second vehicle pulled into the driveway. Two forensic document examiners stepped out carrying secured cases. Moments later, Representatives from the bank handling my grandmother's estate arrived with additional records. The atmosphere shifted. This was no longer a preliminary search. The investigation was moving into verification. Inside the house, the dining table had become a temporary workspace. Original estate documents were placed beside certified copies. A handwriting expert adjusted a bright examination lamp and compared signatures line by line. "This signature was executed 6 years ago," she explained, pointing to an authenticated will. She moved another document beside it. "And this one is supposedly from last year." Daniel leaned closer. "They look similar. They're intended to." The expert traced several small differences. "The pen pressure is inconsistent. Letter formations change. These signatures were not written by the same person." The room fell silent. Another investigator opened electronic banking records. These transfers occurred over an 18-month period. A timeline appeared on the screen. Small withdrawals, then larger transfers, then entire accounts quietly emptied. Every transaction eventually pointed toward accounts connected to Rachel. Daniel slowly sat down. "My grandmother's estate." He looked up. "You're saying someone was taking money the entire time?" "That's what the records currently indicate." Later that afternoon, my phone rang. "This is Investigator Collins." "Yes. We'd appreciate a formal statement regarding what you observed yesterday in your brother's office." "I'll cooperate. You understand you're not accused of any wrongdoing." "I know." At the station, the interview lasted less than an hour. I described exactly what had happened. I entered the office looking for tape. "What did you see?" "Estate folders on the desk." "Did you touch them?" "No." "Did you photograph anything?" "No." "What made you remember them?" "The signatures looked unusual." The investigator nodded. "Did Mrs. Okoro say anything?" "Only asked why I was there and immediately closed the folder." He wrote a few notes. "Thank you." I stood. "Is there anything else you need?" "Not at this time. We appreciate that you've limited your statement to what you personally observed." That mattered to me. I wasn't there to speculate, only to tell the truth. Back at Daniel's house, Rachel made one final attempt to explain herself. "I handled paperwork because nobody else wanted to." She looked directly at Daniel. "You know how disorganized your family was after your grandmother died." Daniel didn't answer. An investigator connected a laptop to a monitor. "We've completed the electronic tracing." The room watched as account histories appeared one after another. Every question transfer followed the same path. Estate account, intermediate account, then deposits into accounts Rachel controlled or could access. The investigator turned toward Daniel. "These transfers were deliberate." Rachel shook her head. "Someone else could have used my accounts." Another investigator responded immediately. "They were authorized using your credentials, your devices, and your verified logins." Rachel's shoulders dropped. For the first time since the investigation began, she had no explanation ready. Daniel covered his face with both hands. Then he looked toward the front window, remembering the reunion only a day earlier. He heard his own voice again. "Apologize or leave." He remembered watching his sister stand alone while everyone stayed silent. He realized Rachel hadn't simply overreacted. She had needed Miriam to look dishonest. If Miriam ever mentioned those documents, no one would believe her after being publicly branded as vindictive. The realization hit him harder than any evidence on the table. Word spread quickly through the family. One by one, relatives who had witnessed the slap called me. "I'm sorry," Aunt Grace said quietly. "I should have spoken up," Uncle Peter admitted. "You didn't deserve what happened," another cousin said. I thanked each of them. But I didn't pretend the previous day had never happened. An apology could acknowledge the truth. It couldn't erase it. Inside the living room, investigators finished organizing the evidence. One officer reviewed the final paperwork, while another spoke quietly into a radio. Rachel glanced toward the hallway, then toward the front door. She took one slow step, as if considering leaving. Before she reached the entrance, an officer moved into her path. His voice remained calm and professional. "Mrs. Okoro." He looked directly at her. "Please stay where you are." Rachel stood perfectly still. The room had become so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound anyone noticed. The lead investigator placed a thick file on the dining table. "Mrs. Okoro," he said evenly, "we've completed the preliminary review of the documents recovered from this residence, the banking records obtained under court order, and the evidence supplied by the financial institutions involved." Rachel swallowed but said nothing. He opened the file. "Over the past 18 months, funds from your late grandmother-in-law's estate were transferred through multiple accounts using forged beneficiary forms and falsified authorization documents." Daniel stared at the pages. "No." The investigator continued. "These transactions were not discovered because of a family dispute." He turned another page. "They were flagged weeks ago through mandatory fraud reporting by several financial institutions after unusual transfer patterns were detected. Estate representatives also reported inconsistencies during routine reviews. Those reports led to this investigation and today's search warrant." Rachel slowly turned toward me. "So she told you?" "No," the investigator interrupted before she could finish. "Ms. Okoro's statement confirmed only that she briefly saw documents in your office yesterday. By that point, the investigation was already well underway." The room fell silent. The shocking surprise, waiting at their home, had never been revenge. It had been the law catching up to months of deception. Daniel looked as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. His voice cracked. "The reunion." He turned toward Rachel. "You slapped my sister." Rachel looked away. "You told everyone she did it on purpose." Still no response. "You made me force her to apologize." He stopped himself. "No." His shoulders sagged. "I forced her." For the first time in years, Daniel stopped hiding behind someone else's decisions. He remembered watching me lower the napkins. He remembered my face after the slap. He remembered every relative who stayed silent because challenging Rachel seemed harder than sacrificing me. His eyes filled with regret. I failed my own sister. No one argued. There was nothing left to defend. When I arrived later to provide a final signature on my witness statement, several relatives were already outside. No one avoided my eyes this time. Aunt Grace walked over first. "Miriam." She hesitated. I should have stopped Rachel yesterday. "You weren't the only one," I answered. Uncle Peter shook his head. "We all saw it was an accident. You shouldn't have stood there alone." I nodded. "I know." One by one, more relatives apologized. None of them tried to excuse what had happened. None of them claimed they hadn't seen it. For the first time, they admitted the truth out loud. Keeping the peace had always meant expecting me to carry the blame. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. Inside the house, officers informed Rachel that she was under arrest on charges related to fraud, forgery, and theft, pending further court proceedings. She didn't protest. She simply lowered her head as she was escorted outside. The neighbors who had gathered watched in silence. The woman who had always controlled every family gathering no longer controlled the story. Over the following months, civil proceedings recovered the missing estate funds. Frozen accounts were traced. Assets connected to the stolen money were identified. The recovered inheritance was redistributed according to my grandmother's original wishes. The estate that had nearly been torn apart was finally settled the way it should have been from the beginning. Daniel cooperated fully with investigators, not because anyone demanded it, because he knew there was no repairing the damage by denying it. He later separated from Rachel and focused on helping untangle the financial mess left behind. Life changed in quieter ways, too. Family gatherings became different. No one appointed a single person to make every decision. No one expected me to apologize simply because it was easier. Months later, another reunion was held. This time, my invitation came directly from several relatives, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted me there. There were awkward moments. There were honest conversations. There were apologies that took courage to give. Daniel approached me near the end of the afternoon. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I know. I chose the easy side instead of the right one." I looked at him for a long moment. "You can't change yesterday." "I know. But you can decide who you'll be tomorrow." He nodded. "I intend to." That was enough for the moment. Not because everything had been repaired. Because rebuilding trust starts with accepting the truth. As I walked toward my car, I glanced back at the family laughing together beneath the same trees where everything had fallen apart months earlier. The gathering looked familiar. The roles within it no longer were. The hardest thing I'd walked away from wasn't that reunion. It was the role of being the family's easiest person to blame. And I never accepted that role again.